The story begins with the protagonist reflecting on the abstract nature of sight. Born without the ability to see, Kunon's family had long accepted his reality, yet they constantly urged him to persevere and take pride in himself, believing he possessed the traits of a hero. Despite their encouragement, the boy continued to question his existence, struggling to comprehend a sense he did not possess. Shortly afterward, Kunon was summoned by his teacher to begin his formal education. Guided to the classroom by one of the mansion's maids, Kunon found his initial sword training complicated and discouraging. However, the maid encouraged him, noting that he might accomplish impressive feats through magic. This sparked a train of thought in the boy regarding how far he could progress without relying on others, as he was painfully aware of his inability to navigate or perform basic tasks without support. Kunon eventually arrived at the room where his master waited to instruct him in the magical arts. When the teacher inquired about his current capabilities, Kunon used his wand to cast a water spell, surprising her by having already mastered the technique. Curious about the physical manifestation of his magic, Kunon asked about the water's size. The teacher replied that it was roughly the size of an eyeball, but upon realizing the insensitivity of her phrasing, she quickly apologized. However, Kunon was not offended. Instead, he realized that he could perceive the shape of magical manifestations, a discovery that filled him with excitement. This newfound perception made him increasingly curious about the world, particularly regarding the textures and nature of the food he consumed daily. Through touch and taste, he explored his meals with renewed interest. When he picked up a fruit, Kunon correctly identified it as an apple before she could speak. Noting his enthusiasm, the maid watched as he smelled a strawberry, commenting on its strong scent. In her excitement, she began pressing different foods against his cheek for him to guess. Later, Kunon's teacher arrived at the library to ask what book he wished to hear that day. He requested a history of the Holy Knight of the Kingdom of Huglia. Although the sudden request surprised the teacher, the maid assured her it was fine, promising to intervene if the content became too heavy. It was explained that long ago, a great war occurred involving heroes from many lands and a demon lord. The hero of the kingdom managed to defeat the enemy but lost an arm and a leg in the battle. Following the war, some of that hero's descendants were born missing body parts or senses, such as their sight. These children were viewed as reincarnations of the hero, bearing what were known as the hero's scars. Kunon, however, rejected this heavy burden, stating that he was simply himself. He practiced using his own magic, managing to duplicate several spheres of water. To him, mastering magic was the key to seeing and feeling the world. Unfortunately, his physical stamina did not match his magical ambition. Whenever he exerted himself, he became exhausted and fainted. While tucking him into bed, he acknowledged that he lacked the physical strength and knowledge to utilize advanced magic. The maid, noting that he was only 7 years old, insisted he needed to eat better to grow strong. Frustrated that he was lagging behind other children and fainting from basic spells, Kunon expressed a desire to develop muscles, despite the difficulty he faced with running or walking. The maid suggested training in sword techniques to build his body, an idea that excited the boy. Eiko, the maid, decided to speak with Kunon's father to hire a qualified fencing instructor. Before she left, Kunon thanked her for her help. While Eiko excitedly contemplated a possible raise, Kunon simply asked that she keep the noise down during his magic training. The following day, a fencing instructor arrived to train Kunon. During the session, Professor Jenny appeared unexpectedly. The instructor cheerfully noted how quickly the day had passed. Jenny observed that Kunon had taken up swordsmanship, and the boy explained that physical strength was a prerequisite for wielding magic effectively. Looking closely, Jenny realized that Kunon had transformed significantly since she last saw him. She offered him a chance to rest, but Kunon preferred to continue training to improve. Later, Jenny decided to review the Aori spell, known as water magic. When Kunon cast the spell, everyone present was astonished to see several water spheres materialize. The teacher was shocked, finding it frightening that he had reached such a high level almost entirely on his own. The narrative then shifts to Mirika, Kunon's future wife. Her maid informed her that the carriage had arrived to take her to see him. Mirika remarked that Kunon had always worn an apathetic expression, but her maid reminded her that the union was decided by the royal family. During the journey, Mirika reflected on the fact that Kunon bore the hero's scars, making the political marriage a royal duty. She recalled their first meeting, where she had wanted to play and learn what he liked, but Kunon had remained distant and sad, lamenting his helplessness. Returning to the present, Mirika felt a deep sadness at the prospect of seeing that dejected face forever. However, upon her arrival, Kunon greeted her with a smile, confusing her completely. She sought to understand what had changed to make him seem so happy. Kunon explained that he had come to like her, a confession that surprised Mirika. He then demonstrated his abilities by creating a rainbow above his head, enchanting her. Kunon apologized for troubling her in the past, and she returned the apology. He asked her to listen to his stories, as he had finally experienced fun moments. Seeing him so cheerful, Mirika fell deeply in love. On her way home, she felt radiant, considering it a wonderful day and eagerly anticipating their next meeting. Back at the mansion, Kunon was surprised to realize that, for the first time, he had reached out his hand to someone. The maid celebrated, declaring this proof that he was a true gentleman. Motivated by this, Kunon asked his teacher the next day to read more about chivalry, wishing to be worthy of Mirika. Meanwhile, the teacher realized she was in a difficult position. She noticed she could no longer maintain 7 water spheres simultaneously, meaning Kunon had evolved far too quickly. There was little left for her to teach him at the basic level. Her initial plan had been to teach simple magic to a child, a low-effort job with a good salary, but she now had to move on to intermediate magic. Although she worried that Kunon was too young to deal with the inherent dangers of advanced magic, she decided to continue the job to support herself. The next day, she attempted to teach Kunon how to imbue feelings into water. To demonstrate, she created 1 icy sphere and 1 hot sphere, explaining that this ability defined a mage's individuality and talent. Kunon decided to try immediately. He cast his magic and asked Eiko to taste it. She realized it was plum juice. The teacher was shocked that he had accomplished in seconds what had taken her an entire night of study. When asked if it was difficult, Kunon casually replied that it was not. At nightfall, Kunon decided to test his perception using 2 apples, trying to better understand aroma and composition. However, he encountered difficulties because he could not physically see colors. Without understanding color, he could not fully grasp magical changes. Despite this, he resolved to continue because he wanted to see everything in the world. At dawn, Kunon went downstairs for breakfast and announced that he could now see colors using magic. Eiko was surprised, though Kunon admitted he likely still couldn't see them properly. When Eiko expressed confusion, Kunon explained that he perceived colors through magic textures. He picked up a green apple and identified it as red. Eiko realized that while the colors appeared distinct to him, he did not yet know their correct names. Kunon agreed, noting it was the first time he had ever perceived these tones. Eiko corrected him, explaining the apple was light green. Although Kunon was confused, realizing that learning to feel color would be difficult, he successfully demonstrated his progress. When Eiko asked how many apples were on the plate, Kunon correctly answered that there were 5, 3 red and 2 green. Eiko was fascinated by the boy's rapid progress and could hardly wait to see what he would achieve next. When Eiko shared her discovery with Kunon's father, the man was stunned to learn that his son could now distinguish colors. Eiko explained that while the range of this magical perception was currently limited, it was sufficient for Kunon to differentiate shades, which became increasingly clear the closer he was to an object, especially through physical touch. Upon being asked if the boy could read, Eiko confirmed that he could, as he had learned to identify the color of ink by running his fingers over the letters. Though Kunon was still mastering the nuances of language, he had already become enchanted by the world of books and illustrated guides. Kunon's father questioned whether the boy might wish to return to the main house to ease the family's worries, but Eiko advised against it. She believed that Kunon was in a vital stage of discovery and that such a move might interfere with his personal goals. Her assessment of his potential was soon proven correct. The following day, Kunon managed to manifest a sphere of red-tinted water. However, the sudden arrival of his family startled him, causing him to drop the magic. The red liquid splashed over him, and seeing her son covered in what appeared to be blood, his mother fainted on the spot. Jenny, observing the scene, realized that Kunon possessed an absurd, almost frightening amount of mana. She began to suspect that he might one day attain the most prestigious title in the magical world, the Blue Mage. The focus shifted to a conversation between Kunon's father and his older brother. The father expressed concern about sending Kunon to a noble school, fearing the boy might be frightened by the outside world after years of isolation. He tasked his older son with protecting Kunon. The brother, haunted by a past failure to protect his sibling, felt a surge of fear but ultimately promised to do everything in his power to be a true older brother. Meanwhile, Kunon's progress continued to bring joy to the household as he began reading through several volumes independently. Jenny noted the cheerful atmosphere and continued her lessons, focusing on social etiquette. She even incorporated Eiko's suggestion of teaching him a sense of humor, hoping to mold him into an elegant yet amusing man. She acknowledged that he was becoming far more adorable and socially capable than he had ever been. As the time for a serious decision approached, Eiko escorted Kunon to the main house to meet his father. On the way, she asked Kunon to use his magic to warm her, which he did successfully. Sensing a shift in the air, Kunon worried he was in trouble for his previous blood sphere mishap, but Aiko reassured him. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by the butler and Kunon's brother. When the brother offered to help him navigate the halls, Kunon politely declined, explaining that his magical senses allowed him to feel everything around him, a revelation that deeply impressed his older sibling. In the meeting with his parents, Kunon initially expressed a desire to avoid the academy, fearing he would only be a burden to others. His father explained that while the king had granted special permission for him to stay home, all nobles were technically required to attend. He warned Kunon that neglecting these duties could harm Mirika's future. Motivated by his desire to protect Mirika's standing, Kunon finally agreed to go. The plan was simplified. He would only need to attend the academy 5 times to take the promotion exams and obtain his official diploma. Kunon later shared the news with Mirika, who was overjoyed at the prospect of spending time with her future husband. Despite his uneasiness about school life and the potential jealousy of other students, Kunon promised to do his best. As they boarded the carriage, Kunon cast a stabilizing spell to prevent the vehicle from shaking, remembering his father's complaints about back pain. During the journey, Kunon confessed to his brother that the desire to disappear, which had plagued his younger years, was gone. He was now determined to live and survive. Upon arriving at the academy, Kunon was welcomed by Mirika. Though he hesitated briefly, overwhelmed by the presence and voices of so many strangers, he took the step forward that the old Kunon never would have taken. His assigned tutor, who had known him since he was very young, was amazed to see how much he had matured as he walked confidently ahead of her. However, his arrival was met with mixed reactions. While some students marveled at him, others, driven by jealousy, viewed him with contempt. During the exams, Kunon easily navigated the time-limited tests, answering every question correctly to his teacher's immense satisfaction. The peace was short-lived, however, as he was soon confronted in the corridors by Lyle, Mirika's brother. Lyle provoked him, openly doubting that Kunon truly held the family blessing. Choosing to settle the matter without a physical brawl, Kunon manipulated the water in the air to create a localized drenching effect on Lyle's trousers. To the surrounding students, it appeared as though the prince had humiliated himself. As Lyle fled in a fit of rage and embarrassment, Kunon's brother panicked over the social fallout, but Kunon remained unbothered, his mind already drifting toward his next goal, finding a hamburger for lunch. After they sat down, Kunon asked the others if they knew why Lyle had made such a fuss earlier. Mirika explained that it was likely an attempt to keep her in check. Since Lyle was the 6th prince and she was the 9th princess, she was technically below him in the royal hierarchy. However, because she was engaged to Kunon, a sorcerer who possessed the hero scar, her status was significantly elevated. Lyle likely felt threatened by the idea of Mirika surpassing him in the hierarchy and had tried to establish dominance, though she noted he wasn't necessarily a bad person. Kunon worried that he might have overdone his reaction earlier and wondered if he should apologize. The others immediately shut down the idea, insisting that Lyle got what he deserved after the stunt he had pulled. Time passed, and back at home, Kunon began learning how to change the texture of ice to mimic other objects. He successfully made the ice feel like an apple, impressing his teacher, though she suggested he try feeling more objects to expand his repertoire of textures. When the day of the final exam arrived, Ixio noticed Kunon repeatedly touching the carriage horse outside the school. When asked what he was doing, Kunon responded that he was simply gathering samples, leaving Ixio baffled. Shortly after, Mirika arrived to greet Kunon. He told her he was going to miss being able to talk to her at school since it was his last day, but Mirika reminded him that they still had the whole day ahead of them, so there was no need for premature goodbyes. As they headed into the exam room, Kunon felt excited as it was his first time actually being in a class with other students. However, he admitted he would also miss the private time he used to spend with Professor Cass during his tests. Cass assured him that she would still be paying attention to him, even with other students present. Ixio noticed that Kunon and Cass seemed to have become very close. Kunon explained it was natural to become friends since he had learned a lot about her through their discussions during tests, such as the fact that Cass only became a teacher because she had a crush on one of the male applicants. The man ended up failing while Cass passed, so she decided to just keep teaching. The others thought it was good that Kunon and Professor Cass were getting along, though they found it a bit odd for her to be venting about her love life to a child. Just then, a group of other students approached, asking Ixio and Mirika to introduce them to Kunon. They admitted they hadn't had a chance to talk to him yet because they were intimidated. Kunon formally introduced himself, revealing he had been concerned that no one ever approached them, leading him to believe Mirika and Ixio had no friends. Mirika explained that her friends only kept their distance because she had told them she wanted to spend quality time with Kunon without being bothered. Kunon was relieved to hear this, as he wouldn't have known what to do if his friends were total loners, though he noted that he personally didn't mind being alone. A little while later, the exam was about to begin, but Lyle was still in the hallway, staring out the window, acting cool and mysterious. His lackeys warned him that the final exam was starting and reminded him that he would have to repeat the year if he missed it, leaving him no choice but to attend. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, Kunon was busy feeling the texture of a pigeon near the windows when Cast announced the test was beginning. Mirika told Kunon she had saved him a seat next to her, but before he could accept, Lyle cut in between them and started staring daggers at Kunon. Ixio, unable to interfere, recalled hearing the royal maid's gossip about how much of a screw-up Lyle was. The reason Lyle acted out so angrily was that he knew people made fun of him behind his back despite their outward respect. While Lyle was lost in thought, Kunon suddenly grabbed his hand and formally introduced himself. Lyle panicked, stating he hadn't given permission to be touched, but Kunon reminded him that they would eventually be brothers-in-law and should get to know one another. As Kunon felt Lyle's hand, he deduced from the skin texture that Lyle must have a handsome face. It was a kind sentiment, and because Lyle rarely received genuine compliments, he didn't know how to handle it. He turned to Mirika to ask if something was wrong with Kunon. Mirika and the rest of the class found the situation funny and began to laugh. Lyle initially thought they were laughing at him, but Mirika explained they were simply laughing because it was the first time anyone had seen him get so flustered. Lyle denied being flustered and demanded Kunon let go, but Kunon held on for a few extra seconds to compliment the strength of Lyle's voice. Lyle, who had planned to be mean to assert dominance, was left unsure of how to react. Cass called for everyone's attention, and the test began. By the end of the day, Cass had finished grading the papers and announced the results. Everyone had passed and would graduate. Afterward, as Kunon and Ixio boarded the carriage to head home, Kunon told the group he had fun. He teased Cass, suggesting that if she was still looking for a boyfriend, she should consider Ixio since he was still single. Ixio protested, and Cass began to regret talking to Kunon about her love life. Additionally, Lyle had learned a lot from his interaction with Kunon and resolved to make an effort to be nicer from then on. A few days later, now that Kunon had graduated, he focused on learning new spells. Jenny was currently testing him on everything he had learned. She asked him to make a spinning ball of water, split it into 10, and then color and texture each one individually, all of which Kunon pulled off with little difficulty. Jenny praised him, but Kunon said he wasn't done yet. He proceeded to turn one of the water balls into a dove and had it fly into the air. Jenny couldn't believe her eyes and fell to her knees, realizing that even master water mages couldn't pull off such a feat so easily. Later, while having tea with Kunon, Jenny asked Aiko to give them some privacy so she could tell Kunon something important. Once they were alone, Jenny announced that there was nothing left for her to teach him. In fact, she felt she hadn't had much to teach for the past few months since she was only meant to instruct him in elementary magic, and he was now a better mage than she was. Kunon stood up and insisted she was a great teacher, noting how much he enjoyed the desperate little tricks she turned into lessons. He explained that while she might not be at the level of advanced mages, her insight gave him new hope. Jenny appreciated his words, admitting she had to work hard to come up with those lessons and was now at her limit. When Kunon asked if she wanted a raise, Jenny clarified that it was the opposite. She felt guilty receiving a high salary when her brain was bone dry of ideas. She insisted he deserved a better sorcerer as a teacher. Despite Kunon begging her to stay, Jenny said goodbye and left the mansion. As she walked away, she thought to herself that Kunon was undoubtedly a genius who would become one of the greatest mages on the continent, vowing to do her best to train her own magic to keep up with him. The next morning, Iko informed Kunon that his usual academic tutor, Miss Flora, had also resigned. Kunon was shocked, though he realized it made sense since he had finished the curriculum and graduated from the Noble Academy. He decided to write her a thank you letter. Iko thought that was a great idea and asked if he could also ask Flora if she knew any single 20-year-old men interested in marriage. Kunon felt hurt, thinking Iko wanted to leave him behind as well. She assured him she wasn't trying to make him feel bad but needed to consider her future. She was sure Kunon would be alright on his own, but Kunon disagreed. With Jenny gone, Flora resigned, and Aiko planning her future, he felt he wouldn't have anyone left soon. That night during dinner, Kunon told his father about Jenny quitting and her advice that he find a master sorcerer to continue his training. Ixio recalled a rumor about an extraordinary royal sorcerer. Their mother recognized the description and asked if Ixio was talking about Zeon Finn, who was famous throughout the capital for his immense power and good looks. She agreed he would be a perfect candidate. However, Kunon's father noted a major problem. As a royal sorcerer, Zeon only took orders from the king and the royal court. Furthermore, he rarely left the castle, making the chances of hiring him slim. Nevertheless, Kunon's father promised to ask the king to see if anything could be done. A little while later, the Grand Master Mage at the royal castle received a report stating that an apprentice-level sorcerer boy was asking to study under one of the royal sorcerers. This was practically unheard of, even for the son of a noble who was best friends with the king. The Grand Master's apprentice happened to be Mirika's older sister, so she personally liked Kunon, but royal sorcerers were not swayed by status or power. The Grand Master initially intended to reject the request regardless of Kunon's connections, but upon reading Kunon's file, he paused. He realized that this kid might actually be special. A couple of days passed, and finally, Kunon received a summons from the royal palace to present himself to the royal sorcerer. He boarded a carriage alongside his father, who appeared quite pleased with how events had unfolded. Kunon remarked that the friendship between the king and his father must run deep for the monarch to agree to such a demand. However, his father clarified that the true reason for the audience was that the head sorcerer of the court had taken a profound interest in Kunon's abilities and wished to meet him personally. When his father inquired about the current extent of his magic, Kunon immediately chanted a spell, creating a small ball of water that quickly transformed into a black cat and settled onto his lap. Amazed, his father reached out to touch the creature, expressing disbelief that magic could achieve such realism. To his surprise, it felt neither like water nor magic. It felt exactly like any stray cat one might find on the street. Kunon explained that he had only recently mastered the animal's appearance, as his previous attempts had resulted in completely transparent constructs. Recently, however, he had managed to control the color as well. As his father played happily with the magical cat, Kunon asked if they should get a real one for their home. Like a typical father, he refused, citing the potential mess, the risk of tripping and hurting himself, and the fact that Kunon's mother preferred dogs anyway. Soon, they entered the capital and were immediately greeted by a silver-haired girl named Rei, the second princess of the kingdom and Mirika's older sister. Kunon greeted her warmly, noting that he was very fortunate to have such a beautiful woman as his future sister-in-law. His father briefly wondered if his son lacked propriety, but decided to address that later. Rei smiled, stating she had heard much about Kunon from her younger sister and wished to have a long conversation with him. She noticed the cat and asked if it required special food, but the moment Kunon's father placed it on the ground, Kunon ended the spell, reducing the cat to nothing more than a puddle of water. This display made Rei realize that Kunon was far more skilled than she had initially thought. While his father lamented not getting the chance to name the cat, Rei offered to escort Kunon to the Black Tower. His father decided to have a chat with the king before heading home, promising to arrange a carriage for Kunon whenever he was ready. Kunon told him not to worry, as he planned to visit Mirika after the Black Tower to take her on a date. His father told him to enjoy his time and departed. As Rei led Kunon toward the Black Tower, she asked if he was comfortable walking or required assistance. Kunon replied that he was fine and immediately launched into a series of complex questions about magic that confused her, as they were highly advanced theoretical inquiries. She admitted she couldn't maintain such a discussion while walking and changed the subject, asking if he knew how many children the current king had. When Kunon admitted he had never thought about it, Rei revealed that the king was quite prolific, having fathered 7 princes and 10 princesses. She was the second princess, while Mirika was the 9th. She explained that the country was unique in that succession did not follow the standard rule of passing the throne to the eldest son. Instead, they followed a meritocracy where all princes and princesses were evaluated based on their skills, merits, and devotion to a particular art. This gave even the youngest child an equal opportunity to win the throne. Rei further revealed that she had already relinquished her right to the throne to focus on becoming a mage, aiming to be one of the best wizards in the country. While passing through a hallway, a sudden sensation drew Kunon toward a window, where he gazed aimlessly in the direction of a dark tower emanating various magical signatures. Rei then offered him a crucial piece of advice, fearing he might be dragged pointlessly into the fight for succession. She warned him not to affiliate with any factions until he was sure of his decision and to never speak words that could be used against him. Grateful for her valuable insights, Kunon decided to return the favor by showing her a special technique. He froze a thin layer of water beneath his shoes, creating ice skates. Rei loved the idea and asked to try it. Kunon cast the spell on her, and the two began skating wildly through the corridors. The guards chased them, panicked that Rei might get hurt, but the duo was much faster and managed to escape. However, their luck soon ran out when a knight spotted them. Although Rei jokingly suggested they could outrun him, the knight caught them and dragged them to the garden for a scolding. Later, they were escorted to the tower, where Kunon was introduced to Rondi, the head sorcerer of the kingdom. Kunon felt humbled by Rondi's presence, realizing how vast the world truly was. While Rei's magic was impressive, Rondi seemed to operate on a completely different level. Rondi immediately asked if Kunon was born with a water crest. When Kunon confirmed this but admitted he knew little about them, Rondi explained that there were 7 types of crests corresponding to magical affinities: fire, water, earth, wind, light, darkness, and void. Additionally, each crest had a rank from 1 to 5 stars. Kunon's 2-star rank was a fairly common occurrence, similar to Rei, who was a 2-star wind mage. Kunon compared himself and Rei to processed American cheese, while Rondi seemed like an artisanal wheel of aged parmesan. Rondi agreed that the description was apt and revealed he was actually a 4-star mage. Rondi then took them to the training ground to gauge Kunon's magical prowess. Kunon felt a bit intimidated, wondering if passing the test meant a royal mage would become his tutor. Rondi wasted no time and called forth an older student, also a royal mage, to demonstrate water magic. The student chanted a spell, creating a brilliant array of water droplets in the air. Rondi instructed Kunon to conquer the boy's magic with his own. Kunon recalled his teacher, Jen, telling him that he could not only create water but also manipulate water already present in the environment. Although he had never tried to control water created by another mage, he realized Rondi had devised a difficult assignment on the fly. Kunon decided to give it his all and attempted to wrestle control from the silver-haired mage. At first, he hit a roadblock as the droplets resisted, the other mage holding them effortlessly. Rondi watched with great interest. Refusing to lose, Kunon used all his stamina to force his will upon the magic. To everyone's surprise, Kunon managed to wrestle control of 2 water spheres before Rondi called a stop to the match. Kunon dropped to his knees, breathing hard, while the silver-haired mage honestly admitted he never thought a mere boy could steal his magic. The student offered to take Kunon under his tutelage, but other mages immediately chimed in, claiming they wanted Kunon as their pupil. Rondi silenced them all, wanting to see what else Kunon could do, and asked him to create something original. Kunon created a trampoline made of water magic. Rondi immediately began bouncing on it, having the time of his life, while other mages lined up to understand how it worked. Rondi told Kunon he wanted him to stay the night at the castle for further testing, but Kunon declined, explaining he had a dinner date with Mirika. Just then, Rei asked if he could create other animals or humans. Kunon confirmed he could do both and created a human doll made of water in the shape of his maid. He noted it was not yet perfect, it remained translucent, and he hadn't dialed in the movements. When the silver-haired mage asked if the dolls could perform tasks, Kunon recounted a failed attempt to make them fly. Forced to demonstrate, he sent the doll launching into the air repeatedly, scaring half the people in the castle and earning another scolding. At sunset, Rondi announced that Kunon had successfully passed the tests and that he would personally assign a sorcerer to help him improve his magic. Overjoyed, Kunon went to tell his father, only to find him irritated after hearing complaints about his son twice in a matter of hours. His father scolded him for being irresponsible before leaving for their mansion. Left alone with Rei, Kunon realized he needed to head to Mirika quickly, or he would be late for dinner. Rei suggested they use magic to travel. They decided to attempt a new experiment. Kunon created a water bubble, and Rei used her wind magic to propel them forward like a magic carpet. They soared through the skies, reaching Mirika's chambers in no time. Unfortunately, Rei forgot to decrease her magic gradually and turn it off completely, causing them to fall. They were caught by the knight Dario for the 3rd time that day, who was furious and subjected them to a long lecture. Meanwhile, Mirika waited in her dress for her Prince Charming, unaware of the chaos outside. Mirika paced anxiously back and forth in her room, fretting over whether her groom-to-be would even show up. Mirika's maid attempted to calm her down, suggesting that Kunon must have stayed too long at the academy, which would explain his tardiness. Thankfully, a knock soon echoed at the door, and the maid found one of the guards waiting to announce that Kunon had arrived and was waiting for the princess outside. The maid turned around to relay the news, only to find Mirika already sitting on the couch, sipping expensive tea, with practiced elegance, acting as if she hadn't just been panicking and pacing the room moments before. However, before the maid could even finish her sentence, Mirika broke her composure and walked briskly out of the room toward her waiting fiancé. She found Kunon waiting at the base of the stairs. He immediately apologized for being late and tried to charm her, commenting that the moon looked beautiful that night, despite his blindness. He asked Mirika for her hand, which she graciously offered, and he guided her into his carriage, taking her to a 3-Michelin-star restaurant. Upon entering the fine dining establishment, they were offered expensive sparkling water. Being wealthy, they indulged freely. And as they drank, Mirika's maid noted the gentlemanly poise Kunon exhibited in the way he carried himself. Mirika initiated the conversation, asking if he had the chance to visit the Black Tower that day. Kunon answered excitedly, revealing that he had met with her older sister and claiming that every single mage he saw at the tower was impressive, including the second princess, Rei. He also informed her that he had passed the mage test but still had no idea who his teacher would be. Kunon continued to flirt with the princess, who seemed to thoroughly enjoy her night, even though her maid found Kunon's behavior slightly embarrassing, though she chalked it up to young love. Once they finished dinner, Kunon caught Mirika by surprise by grabbing her arm. He told her that while these dinners were currently a rarity, once they were married, every single night would look like this. The declaration surprised the maid, who, influenced by romantic stories, decided Kunon wasn't so bad after all. Mirika managed to control her emotions and remain elegant in the moment, but as soon as she returned to her room, she giggled like a little girl with joy, thinking about Kunon's promises. A couple of days later, Kunon returned to his mansion. He was sitting in his study writing a report when Aiko called out to him. She was washing clothes and asked for his help. Kunon utilized a variation of his water magic to create bubbly water that easily swept away the dirt and grime. Aiko thanked him but was met with Kunon's complaint that his report would now be delayed. She scolded him to stop acting like a loser trapped in his room studying, warning him that being a nerd wouldn't get him anywhere. She added that if he didn't spend time in the sun playing and soaking in fresh air, his growth would be stunted. Kunon realized the harsh truth that girls generally preferred tall men, but Aiko promised she would like him regardless of his height, provided he was well endowed. They sat beneath the shade of the drying clothes, and Kunon asked if they had received a letter back from the Black Tower, as it seemed they still hadn't decided on his teacher. His wish came true a few days later, when a letter arrived, revealing that the devilishly handsome Master Sorcerer Zeon had been assigned as his new tutor. Kunon didn't know what to make of the man, having only heard about him from his mother, but Aiko went wild with excitement. She claimed Zeon was the most handsome man on the continent and immediately began worrying about losing weight and styling her hair to look her best in case Zeon spotted her. Back at the castle, Rei visited Mirika to inform her that Zeon had been chosen as Kunon's tutor. Mirika was excited, knowing Kunon would learn from the best sorcerer, while Rei sighed, admitting she had wanted to be Kunon's teacher herself because he was fun and would make an interesting student. Later, while walking through the corridor, Mirika spotted two of her older sisters, Eve and Lydia. They smirked at her, causing Mirika to freeze in her tracks. Fortunately, Rei was with her, providing some confidence. Eve interrupted, noting they had heard a lot about Mirika's fiancé, Kunon. She joked that since they were only betrothed and not yet married, he could technically fall in love with and marry any other princess he wanted. This made Mirika insecure, but Rei snapped back, insulting the sisters' appearances and stating that Kunon wouldn't look at them even if he had working eyes. Flustered and angry, the sisters ran past them, shouting that Rei should mind her own business and act more like a princess, noting she had already been scolded thrice by a knight. Back at Kunon's mansion, he drank tea with Aiko, wondering exactly what kind of person his teacher was, while Aiko blushed just thinking about seeing Zeon up close. Suddenly, a carriage stopped at their door, and Mirika hopped out. Kunon was surprised to see her unexpectedly but immediately began trying to charm her, claiming he needed to mentally prepare himself to be around such a beautiful woman. Unbeknownst to him, Zeon was also inside the carriage, listening to his cringeworthy flirting and wondering why he had been dragged into this situation. Oblivious, Kunon continued talking about how Mirika must have changed her soap. Zeon finally decided to exit the carriage. Kunon immediately felt a different presence and realized it could only be Zeon. While Aiko panicked internally, Kunon focused on how strong Zeon must be, literally feeling the dense magical aura surrounding him. Kunon realized this man was much stronger than any mage he saw at the Black Tower, perhaps even stronger than the Grand Master. Mirika noticed the look on Kunon's face and asked if anything was wrong, but Kunon ignored her to greet Zeon and introduce himself. Zeon dismissed the pleasantries, stating he didn't care about formalities and hated brats. Aiko thought about how foul-mouthed the mage was but simultaneously found his attitude attractive. Zeon outright declared he hadn't chosen to be Kunon's tutor, and that the job was practically forced on him by the Grand Master. Kunon, unbothered, replied that they were all bound by the reins of politics and hierarchy, so there was nothing to be done. Dario, Mirika's guard, also introduced himself formally, and Kunon apologized to him for causing a ruckus previously. They all sat down for tea, which proved to be a hassle for Zeon, who couldn't tolerate the atmosphere between Princess Mirika and Kunon as they kept flirting back and forth. Zeon finally stepped in, telling them to control themselves, as he was there to discuss magic, not listen to corny dialogue between two lovebirds. Zeon decided to have some fun and test Kunon, asking if he knew anything about compound magic. Kunon replied that it was a special type of advanced magic, where the spellcaster used multiple different spells at once. Zeon smiled and asked how many spells he could use simultaneously. Nothing could have prepared Zeon for the answer. Kunon replied that he could use 31 spells at once, sometimes pushing to 32 before failing. Zeon was genuinely impressed, admitting he himself could go up to 50, which surprised Kunon, who didn't think anyone was gifted enough to use that many. Zeon then asked how Kunon managed to pass the 20-spell cliff, where almost everyone else failed. Kunon explained that he simply clubbed a bunch of spells together and stacked them on top of each other. Zeon was impressed that Kunon figured that out on his own and quickly realized why other mages were jealous that he got to teach Kunon. He finally understood that Kunon possessed exceptional talent. Invested now, Zeon stood up and told Kunon to show him what he could do, unwilling to waste time on someone who was all talk. He jokingly told Kunon to suck up to him and beg him to be his tutor. Mirika thought Kunon would never do something so undignified, but she was proven wrong as he immediately folded, praising Zeon as the best sorcerer in the world and complimenting his scent. Creeped out, Zeon told him to stop and used a spell to create a wall out of dirt. He challenged Kunon to destroy the wall using any method he fancied. Before Kunon could begin, Zeon demanded he make a waterbed, having heard much about them. Kunon immediately used his magic to create one. Zeon claimed he would watch from the bed, but the moment he touched it, he was transported to another world by its softness and immediately fell asleep. Meanwhile, Kunon inspected the wall. He realized that although it looked simple, it contained an extremely dense magic spell, making it practically indestructible. He discovered Zeon had compounded the spell over 40 times to reinforce it. Kunon didn't fret. Instead, he sat down with the princess for tea, deciding to wait for Zeon to wake up before breaking the wall. 2 hours passed, and Zeon woke to find the sun setting and his walls still standing. He asked if Kunon had given up, but Kunon responded that he was simply waiting for Zeon to wake up to deal with it. Kunon walked up to the wall and used his detergent water spell, which slowly washed away the dirt. Zeon smiled, realizing that instead of forcing his way through with a water blast like others would have, Kunon chose the smarter route. Observing this, Zeon decided to formally accept Kunon as his student, informing him that he would be assisting with experiments starting the following day. The next day, Zeon arrived once again alongside Princess Mirika and immediately called out to Kunon, declaring that he was the luckiest boy in the world for having the privilege of being taught by the greatest mage in the entire kingdom. By this point, Kunon had become a master at shameless flattery and wasted no time buttering Zeon up, claiming that he truly was the luckiest person alive to be trained by the most handsome man in the kingdom. Zeon seemed satisfied by the praise and smiled, warning that the day's work would be difficult and that Kunon should not expect any mercy. In response, Kunon immediately began acting as though he were in a dramatic soap opera, clutching his head and insisting that if Zeon went easy on him, he would assume that his master no longer loved him. The act creeped Zeon out, and he promptly told the boy to behave himself before ushering him inside. Once inside the room, Kunon's excitement faded when he realized what his task for the day actually was. Instead of learning new magic, he was expected to neatly transcribe Zeon's scattered memos into proper documents with clean handwriting. It quickly became obvious to Kunon that this was work Zeon himself was too lazy to do and had simply dumped onto him. Though disappointed, and despite having been excited to learn new kinds of magic, Kunon had no choice but to agree. Zeon then turned toward the rest of the group and ordered them to leave, explaining that the documents were national secrets that could not be read by anyone else. Kunon apologized to Mirika and promised that he would finish quickly and rejoin her soon. She smiled reassuringly before leaving the room with the others. After they were alone, Zeon instructed Kunon to recreate the water bed he had made the previous day. Kunon immediately used his magic, forming a warm and comfortable water bed. Without saying a word, Zeon flopped onto it and fell into a deep sleep almost instantly. Kunon let out a quiet sigh and returned to his assigned work. Meanwhile, outside in the gazebo, Mirika took Aiko aside and confided that she had secretly been learning how to fight with a sword for the past few days. She asked Aiko not to tell Kunon yet. Aiko was surprised, as it was rare for a princess to learn swordsmanship, but she agreed to keep the secret. Soon after, Mirika prepared herself and entered the arena with a wooden sword, facing Dario. As they sparred, it was clear that she had only recently begun training, but her progress was impressively fast. Her determination stemmed from her desire to become strong enough to stand beside Kunon as his equal. Knowing that Kunon bore a hero's scar and would one day be widely celebrated, She felt the need to develop her own skills and talents so that the two of them would be viewed as equals in the eyes of others. Back upstairs, Kunon continued deciphering the old parchments. He frequently got stuck, as Zeonli's handwriting was so atrocious that it was nearly impossible to tell whether he was looking at letters or diagrams. While struggling with one particularly confusing memo, Zeonli eventually woke up, fully refreshed, and asked how much progress Kunon had made. Kunon reported that he was nearly halfway done. Rather than praising him, Zeonli mocked his pace. Kunon fired back, remarking that anyone would go blind trying to read Zeonli's handwriting and that even an earthworm dragged through mud would produce something more legible. Zeonli snapped back, insisting that his work should not be compared to a lowly earthworm, but Kunon countered by saying he fully intended to send Zeonli an invoice for all the labor he was being forced to do. Zeonli reminded him not to get too clever and explained that this task itself was part of Kunon's training. He elaborated that information read from books was often forgotten, but information the mind struggled to interpret then carefully wrote down became deeply engraved and far harder to lose. Understanding the purpose behind the exercise, Kunon finally grasped the meaning of the training and thanked Zeonli. As evening arrived, Zeonli prepared to leave and instructed Kunon to complete the remaining work before his next visit. Before Zeonli could depart, Kunon stopped him and asked about the strange diagram in one of the memos that resembled a spell. After thinking it over, Zeonli realized it would be easier to demonstrate than explain and told Kunon to visit him in the capital next time. Kunon was thrilled by the idea and eagerly turned to Mirika, telling her that they would see each other again very soon. The following day, Kunon returned to the capital and prepared to enter the Black Tower once more. He was immediately surrounded by royal mages, all excited to see him again and eager to bombard him with questions. Before Kunon could answer any of them, Zeonli arrived and ordered him to follow. When Rei questioned Zeonli in horror about whether he intended to take Kunon into the demon room, Zeonli ignored him completely. He instructed Kunon to create the waterbed once more, which worked perfectly, causing the curious mages to fall asleep. The two then continued upward through the tower. On the way, Zeonli asked whether Kunon knew anything about magical weapons. Kunon explained that such weapons were designed to channel their users' magic. Zeonli agreed and added that there were mages whose sole responsibility was crafting magical weapons for royal use. Zeonli then opened the door to his study, revealing a room buried beneath layers of dust and overflowing with scrolls. Kunon was both amazed and exhilarated. He eagerly examined the scrolls, discovering spell after spell he had never seen before. While flipping through them, he came across a special magic book reserved for only a select group of royal mages. He jokingly claimed that he intended to exploit nepotism to gain access to it and excitedly announced that he wanted to live there forever. Zeonli responded calmly, telling him that he would not need to live there, as he could eventually have everything if he truly wanted it. Zeonli then turned his attention to a box, explaining that he had been working on a special magical tool for several months. The strange diagram Kunon had seen earlier was an illustration of this very device. When Kunon opened the box, he found it empty and asked what it was supposed to do. Zeonli explained that the device was meant to produce whatever the user desired without requiring movement, such as instantly creating an apple. Kunon enthusiastically declared that he would love such a device, especially if it could make pancakes. Zeonli explained that with Kunon's water magic, they could finally begin testing the device. Zeonli's earth magic would form the outer shell, while Kunon's water magic would handle the intricate moving parts within. Realizing the potential of the invention, Kunon agreed to work alongside him. Later, during lunch, the headmaster informed Kunon about a prestigious school of wizardry and witchcraft attended by mages from all over the world. Kunon had never heard of it before and was immediately captivated by the idea. Zeonli advised him not to dwell on it yet, reminding him that only mages aged 12 and above could enroll, while Kunon was still only 10. 2 years passed, and Zeonli finally decided to test everything Kunon had learned. They stood before Zeonli and the others as Kunon prepared himself, gathering his water magic. Zeonli attacked first, launching sharp earth spikes toward him. Forced to respond quickly, Kunon used compound magic to create countless water droplets that absorbed the impact before surging back as a powerful tsunami that crashed at Zeonli's feet. Satisfied, Zeonli declared that Kunon had passed the test. Kunon was overjoyed. Afterward, they returned indoors, where Aiko produced a magic pot that conjured a freshly baked pie. Mirika tasted it and remarked that it tasted as though it had come straight from the oven. Kunon proudly noted that their invention had become a massive success in the market, though he complained that he had yet to see any of the profits, as all the money flowed straight into Zeonli's pockets. Later in the study, Mirika observed that Zeonli and Kunon had already collaborated on over 5 successful magical devices. Kunon added that another was currently in development, and that they had also released 5 new theories of magic in a newly published manual. Zeon then reminded Kunon that he no longer needed to worry about their ongoing project. With Kunon turning 12 in the spring, it was time to prepare for magic school. At first, Kunon refused, believing Zeon was the only teacher he needed. Zeon explained that as an earth mage, he could not properly teach advanced water magic, and that the world beyond was vast, filled with extraordinarily powerful water mages. Though reluctant, Kunon was eventually persuaded when Mirka encouraged him to leave, promising that she would also continue improving herself, so that when they met again, she would be worthy of standing beside him. That evening, after saying a final goodbye to Zeon, Kunon returned to his study. Reflecting on the past few years, he realized that he had grown so accustomed to sensing the world without sight that he had forgotten his greatest ambition to create a functional pair of eyes for himself. He understood that achieving this goal required becoming stronger, and that could only happen through proper training under a true water mage. Days passed as he became consumed by the problem. After countless failures, one morning he finally reached a breakthrough. He realized he had been overcomplicating things. Instead of creating eyes, all he needed was a mirror capable of reflecting the world and transmitting that information directly to his brain. Acting immediately, he began working, and soon, for the first time in his life, he opened his eyes and truly saw the world. Tears streamed down his face, another first. He wandered the room, observing books, furniture, and finally his reflection in the window. That was when he noticed a giant insect monster standing directly behind him. To his surprise, the crab simply stood there, unmoving. A short while later, Kunon realized the creature was not a threat. He turned back to his invention and used his magic to create a mirror. Ever since deciding to learn magic, he had taken a vow. Once he finished creating a new set of eyes for himself, he would take a long look at the person he hated most himself. He recalled how his parents and servants had always hovered, ensuring he never came to harm. Once the mirror was finished, he finally opened his eyes. He noted that he did not seem very tall, nor did he have a beard, though he reasoned this was because he was still a child. He turned toward the crab again and tried to make conversation, but the creature remained mute, staring blankly ahead. Kunon called for Eiko, who arrived instantly. She didn't give the crab a single glance. Suddenly, she noticed a strange magical ball floating near him and realized his eyes were open. Full of joy, she asked if he had successfully managed to create a working set of eyes. Kunon smiled and nodded, causing Eiko to fling herself at him in congratulations. In the process, she accidentally threw the magical ball into the air, causing Kunon a great deal of dizziness. She insisted they tell his father immediately and announced she would cook a feast in his honor. Kunon looked back at the crab, wondering if he should just ask Eiko to cook it for dinner. When he returned his gaze to Eiko, however, he noticed she appeared to have a horn on her head. He asked her seriously about it, but Eiko jokingly replied that she only grew a horn when she was angry, and it disappeared when she was happy. Kunon didn't know what to make of this. He had never imagined Eiko with a horn. Eiko didn't quite know how to respond, so they simply moved outside. This was the first time Kunon was able to see the world with his own eyes. He stood in the field, looking at the grassy meadows, distant mountains, and a central castle. Surprisingly, he didn't see what a normal person would see. Instead, the colors were inverted. The sun looked black, the bright blue sky appeared a dull purple, and the grass was a deathly pale blue. Kunon felt something was wrong. None of his books had mentioned a black sun. Eiko approached from behind, helping him into a cloak to escape the cold, and suggested they proceed to his parents' manor. Kunon finally asked the question bugging him. Could Eiko see the giant crab standing behind him? Eiko dismissed it, thinking Kunon was just spinning fantasy stories, and told him to make her character cool in his tale. Kunon realized it was useless to argue, so they continued walking through the meadows accompanied by the crab toward the manor. He knew the experiment was a success since he could see, but something gnawed at him. He shouldn't be seeing the things currently before him. Once inside, he finally saw his mother and brother. Both were overjoyed. His mother started crying as she smiled, while his brother praised him for achieving the impossible. Kunon, however, couldn't concentrate on their praise. His brother was sporting a beautiful pair of wings, looking as if he had just returned from a pride parade. His mother, meanwhile, had eyeballs of entirely different colors. He thought they both looked incredibly cool and wondered why no one had ever mentioned these features. He told his mother she looked like a princess from a play and told his brother he looked majestic. He turned to his brother and asked if their parents were discount angels. However, since the family had a habit of avoiding direct questions, his brother replied that he didn't know anything about that. Kunon then asked Eiko if people in this world could have wings. Eiko, acting like an English teacher forcing meaning into a simple number, told Kunon that everyone was born with wings and that he had finally spread his by reaching his potential. He soon realized he was surrounded by idiots and decided that the crab, the horn, and the feathers were immaterial, since only he could see them. His vision was definitely flawed. Suddenly, his father ran into the room. Kunon wondered what he would look like, only to be annoyed when he saw that his father resembled a green poltergeist. His father happily congratulated him, claiming he would send a letter to the capital immediately. Soon, they all left, leaving only Kunon and his brother. Kunon asked if their father was usually such a slimeball. His brother told him to shut his mouth, warning that their father would cry if he heard such truth. Kunon sighed, thinking the ick of his household was lower than a broken table lamp, and decided to save his real queries for his teacher. The next morning, Kunon's wishes manifested as a royal carriage arrived from the capital, carrying Princess Mirika, Sir Dario, and the eccentric teacher Zeon. Kunon rushed down to greet Mirika, warmly welcoming her to his manor. Mirika was overwhelmed with joy that Kunon had regained his sight, claiming he had achieved what no one else thought possible. However, Kunon kept his eyes squeezed shut, terrified that his future wife might look chopped or distorted by his strange new vision. Mirika gently asked him to open his eyes, wanting him to see her for who she truly was. Kunon slowly complied. He took in her regal posture and her blonde hair, which shimmered like a million threads of gold in the sun. Her smile was demure and mindful. Just as he began to relax, thinking his fiancée was free of any bizarre features, he spotted it, a single, distinct feather sprouting from the top of her head. He let out a heavy sigh of exhaustion. Mirika misinterpreted his reaction as disappointment and began to sink into insecurity. Quickly utilizing his natural charm, Kunon reassured her, comparing her to a graceful dove flying freely in the sky. Sir Dario stepped out of the carriage then, joking that this dove had improved so much in swordsmanship that she was more of a hawk. Kunon's attention shifted to an ethereal, shimmering sword on Dario's back. When he asked about it, Dario assumed he meant his standard steel blade and began a lecture on how it was forged in fire. Kunon realized the ethereal sword wasn't real. His eyes were playing tricks on him again. Suddenly, Zeon's voice boomed from behind. Kunon looked up and was immediately blinded by a golden light emanating from the man, so intense that everything else vanished in the glare. Shielding his eyes, Kunon cried out that he couldn't see anything because of the brightness. Zeon, ever the narcissist, assumed Kunon was simply complimenting his shining presence. Frustrated by the self-centered nature of his guests, Kunon insisted on speaking with Zeon alone. Once they were in private, he revealed the truth about his distorted vision. Zeon burst into laughter, finding the idea of Mirika having a single quill on her head absurd. Kunon snapped at him not to take the matter lightly. He didn't want to live his life with a constant crab by his side or seeing a feather on his bride for no reason. Zeon eventually turned serious, concluding there were two possibilities. First, Kunon might be seeing the shape of souls, meaning the crab was a representation of Kunon's own spirit. Second, he might be suffering from a severe case of magic sickness. Zeon recalled a time in a high magic forest where he felt drunk and saw strange creatures. While Kunon noted the similarity, Zeon admitted they lacked the data to be sure. He encouraged Kunon to view his sight as a gift, noting that different animals see the world in different colors without their vision being flawed. By the time they returned outside, the sun was setting. Zeon couldn't help but chuckle one last time at the mental image of the feathered princess. The following evening, the household celebrated Kunon's 12th birthday. It was a bittersweet occasion, marking his final night before departing for the magical academy. His father gifted him a sturdy wooden staff, while his mother provided a new quill set. His brother handed him a guide to the best eateries, the Michelin Guide of their era. Later, under the moonlight, Mirika presented her own gift, a bracelet that matched one she wore herself. Kunon promised to return as soon as possible, and they held hands one last time. The next morning, the family gathered to see him off. His mother was on the verge of tears, and his father urged her to be strong, fearing that a display of sorrow would make Kunon's departure too difficult. To their utter surprise, Kunon remained perfectly composed. He skipped the emotional hugs, hopped onto the cart, and gave a casual wave, adding that he might return in a couple of years or perhaps not. As the carriage rolled away, he settled in next to Aiko, already dreaming of the powerful sorcerers and strange new people he would encounter at the academy. Kunon and Aiko continued their journey for another 5 days until Aiko, growing bored, inquired about the remaining travel time. Kunon revealed that the academy was still quite far away, estimating that their best bet was another month of travel. Aware that Aiko had decided against accompanying him to the academy, Kunon asked if she was certain about her decision. Aiko explained that she had been of marriageable age for some time and wished to settle down to start her life in the truest sense. She feared that continuing with him would make her too old for any good matches, insisting that it was now or never. and that giving up now would mean abandoning the idea of having a life altogether. When Kunon attempted to emotionally manipulate her by asking if she thought he could live without her, Eiko retorted by asking if he would be willing to cast Princess Mirika aside to marry her instead. Realizing he had no response to that, Kunon fell silent and looked out the window, where he finally spotted his grandfather's manor looming in the distance. Upon their arrival at the manor, Kunon struggled to recall his last visit, but Eiko remembered it vividly. She reminded him that he had forced his entire family to visit 4 years prior after learning of his grandfather's massive library of magical books. At the time, Kunon had been doing his absolute best to learn magic by any means necessary. He had even resorted to performing a cringy TikTok dance until they agreed to come. When the doors opened, his grandfather emerged with open arms, declaring how dearly he had missed him. Kunon reciprocated the energy, rushing into a hug, though he hallucinated a pair of demonic horns on his grandfather's head. To celebrate Kunon's acceptance into the magical academy, his grandfather offered to buy him anything he desired as a gift. Eiko immediately attempted to intervene, clearing her throat and stating that Kunon's mother wanted the old man to read a letter she had sent. The grandfather initially ignored her, asking Kunon if he wanted jewels and calling for a jeweler, but Eiko persisted until he retreated to his study to read the correspondence. He put on his reading glasses and became immediately annoyed to find that his daughter, knowing his tendencies, had capped his spending on Kunon at $10,000. He complained that such an amount was nothing in the current economy, but Kunon reminded him that he was only 12 years old, while Eiko added that the sum equaled 3 months of her salary. Still hellbent on a grand gesture, the grandfather suggested they simply keep the purchase a secret from Kunon's mother. However, Kunon stated that what he actually needed was a new maid, given that Eiko would not be accompanying him further. His grandfather introduced the new maid, Rinko, who was Eiko's younger sister and also sported a horn on her head. Rinko greeted Kunon warmly, explaining that she took the job on her sister's recommendation and because the pay was decent. She clarified that she was saving for her wedding and was not open to any happy ending services. Kunon assured her there was no need to worry, as he had a beautiful fiancée of his own whom he believed should be cherished above all else. Rinko agreed, noting that she and her fiancé planned to open a store in the future and she was saving for that as well. Later, as the maids prepared the dinner table, Rinko admitted she had expected a stuck-up brat due to his reputation as the bearer of the hero's scar, but found Kunon to be a surprisingly chill guy. Eiko advised her that Kunon cared mostly for magic and often forgot to eat, suggesting Rinko keep sandwiches ready so he could eat while working. This advice triggered a wave of nostalgia for Eiko. She recalled how Kunon's father had hired her specifically for his eccentric son and how her initial confusion had turned into genuine care through their many highs and lows. She remembered seeing him in his school uniform for the first time and the moment he was finally able to see her with his own eyes. Saddened by the memories, she turned to Rinko and emphasized that despite his reputation, Kunon was still a trusting child who needed protection from harm. Rinko countered that Kunon's charming personality and ability to compliment women made him a prime target for girls at the academy, suggesting a high possibility of him becoming a womanizer. Unable to bear the thought, Eiko snapped at her sister to be quiet, insisting that Kunon was an angel who would never do such a thing. The next morning, Kunon packed his bags and prepared to leave. Eiko entered his room to announce that the carriage was ready. Kunon thanked her for everything, acknowledging he would never have become the man he was without her. He noted it would be a couple of years before they met again, to which Eiko replied that she would likely be a married woman with a child of her own by then. After a final hug, Kunon boarded the carriage with Rinko, ignoring his grandfather's pleas to stay and live with him instead. As they departed, Kunon asked Rinko if she was truly okay leaving her fiancé behind for several years. Rinko assured him it was not an issue as they had discussed it. Since they needed money for the restaurant they planned to open, the separation was necessary. Day after day, they traveled until they finally entered the kingdom of Durashik, a land known for its magic. As they walked through the magic-themed streets, Kunon noticed a store displaying interesting-looking magic books and went inside. He was amazed by the selection, though Rinko questioned the appeal, citing his grandfather's extensive library. Kunon explained that he had already read everything in his grandfather's collection, which lacked variety in magical texts, whereas this store was dedicated to incredibly rare magical tomes. Rinko peeked at a price tag and was shocked to see a single book costing up to $5 million, an amount she claimed she couldn't earn in multiple lifetimes. Kunon laughed, explaining that the price reflected the book's unique nature. Before they could leave, a woman with glasses approached, asking if Kunon was a magician studying at the academy. When Kunon replied that he was merely an applicant, she asked for a demonstration. Kunon conjured a small cat, which the woman immediately cuddled, declaring it one of the cutest things she had ever seen. she admitted she lacked magical talent herself but worked there due to her love for the art. She mentioned that the upcoming term would be intense, as the saint from the Holy Kingdom was also enrolling. She then offered Kunon a discount on what she claimed was a first edition book by the famous sorcerer Zeon. Kunon declined and left the shop. When Rinko asked why he turned down such a bargain, Kunon revealed that the book was likely a copy he had written himself while working with Zeon. Later, in a clothing store, Rinko tried on various outfits while Kunon examined the fabrics. He asked the storekeeper about a specific fur, and upon learning it was from a dark fox, Kunon contemplated the texture before conjuring a lifelike dark fox right in front of them. The confused storekeeper was shocked by the realism. Kunon explained that he could create anything once he understood how it felt. When the storekeeper thoughtfully asked if Kunon could create a woman for him, an enraged Rinko told the man to keep it in his pants and called him an incel before storming out. They eventually moved on to the capital of Durashik, where they were greeted by a magical academy even larger than Kunon had imagined. When Rinko asked about their living arrangements, Kunon assured her they would stay in a dorm. However, inside the academy, the receptionist crushed their hopes, revealing that the dorms were full and required prior application. Outside, Rinko suggested a hotel, but Kunon dismissed the idea as too expensive for a multi-year stay. Just as he considered renting a room, the receptionist caught up to them with flyers for real estate agents. Kunon's eyes lit up at the prospect of renting a private house, just as he had in his own country. By the end of the day, they had secured a beautiful house near the academy. The next morning, they returned to the academy for the entrance exam. The receptionist informed Rinko that she could not proceed past the entrance, as only students and staff were permitted. While Rinko waited outside, the receptionist, named Lu, escorted Kunon through a corridor to a grassy field where 3 other applicants were already waiting for their assessment. The other applicants appeared genuinely confused by the fact that Kunon wore an eye mask. Unbeknownst to them, Kunon had created a magic eye to observe his fellow candidates, allowing him to notice that they all possessed interesting hidden features. His attention was particularly drawn to a girl who seemed exceptionally special. Approaching her, he inquired if she was the saint from the Holy Kingdom. She confirmed her identity but expressed confusion over his sudden interest, given that they had never met before. Kunon explained his fascination, noting that she was the first light element magician he had encountered in real life, and expressed his eagerness to learn everything he could about her abilities. The saint dismissed his enthusiasm, operating under the belief that light magic was superior to all other forms, which meant a water mage like him would have nothing to learn. However, her statement drew bewildered looks from the surrounding applicants, as no such hierarchy existed among magic types. Realizing her error, the saint apologized, admitting she was merely repeating the doctrine taught at her temple. Taking the opportunity to address the group, she issued an advance apology for her general demeanor. She explained that due to the lingering effects of an inherited hero scar, she lacked the normal spectrum of human emotions and might unintentionally offend them despite speaking normally. Upon hearing this, Kunon grew incredibly excited at the prospect of them becoming disabled besties, a concept that left the saint thoroughly bewildered. The awkward exchange was interrupted by the arrival of the professors in charge of the entrance exam. Kunon assessed them immediately. Professor Surf possessed formidable strength, and while Professor Seifi was also strong, her defining feature, a swarm of rats at her feet, felt slightly underwhelming. After introductions, Surf and Seifi preemptively congratulated all 4 applicants on their enrollment into the Durashik Magic School. The candidates were shocked to hear this, as they had not yet completed any tasks. Surf clarified that admission was practically guaranteed for any capable sorcerer, and that the rumors of a grueling entrance exam were merely a tactic to boost the school's competitive reputation. Furthermore, since all 4 students possessed exceptionally rare magic crests, their acceptance was inevitable. This revelation disappointed Kunon, who had studied vigorously to ensure his success. However, Surf reassured him that his efforts were not wasted, as a placement test would still occur to determine which of the 3 academic tiers they would enter. The first tier, Fundamentals, was designed for mages to learn basic magic. The second, Teacher-Assisted, provided standard magical coursework. And the third, Independent Research, allowed advanced mages the freedom to study whatever they wished, provided they committed no crimes. The prospect of independent research thrilled Kunon, though his blatant optimism visibly irritated Seifi. Surf cautioned that the advanced class was reserved strictly for top-tier mages, making both entry and graduation highly difficult. The first phase of the assessment was a practical demonstration, so Surf instructed each student to step forward, state their crest type, its rank, and their maximum spell capacity. Stepping up first, Hank revealed a 2-star fire crest and a repertoire of 7 spells. When asked to demonstrate his strongest ability, he cast a Fire Path spell. Kunon was highly impressed. Although it was a basic spell, Hank used his magic energy to lay out a customized path, granting the spell endless applications. By the end of the demonstration, Hank had burned a precise spiral pattern into the grass, earning Surf's praise. Rhea followed, announcing a 2-star wind crest and 8 spells. Surf, who also possessed a wind crest, quietly rooted for the boy. Before casting his best spell, Rhea warned the group to keep their distance due to its destructive nature. He raised his wand, gathered immense magical energy from the sky, and unleashed a massive wind blast against the ground. Kunon found this display of intermediate magic truly remarkable. Reyes then stated she possessed a 3-star light crest and 5 spells. While her strongest ability was healing magic, the lack of current injuries prompted her to demonstrate her second-best spell, a beam of light attack. Kunon was astounded, noting that such an attack was nearly impossible to dodge unless a target evaded before the casting even began, and he silently hoped to witness more of her light magic capabilities. When it was Kunon's turn, he announced his 2-star water crest but admitted he could only cast 2 spells, the water ball spell and the bubble spell. This surprised Surf, who had received explicit instructions via recommendation letters from the Grand Mage and the famous mage Zeon to make Kunon's exam exceptionally difficult. The mention of Zeon shocked the other students, who were unaware of Kunon's connection to such a renowned figure in the magical education field. It also explained Sifi's earlier hostility, as she harbored a rocky history with Zeon. Unfazed by the raised difficulty, Kunon accepted the challenge. Surf encased himself in a wind barrier, instructing Kunon to find a way to defeat him. The other students deemed it an impossible task, knowing elementary water magic was easily repelled by wind. Kunon, however, only looked at Surf with disappointment over the perceived lack of challenge. Surf found his confidence amusing but demanded he complete the test before complaining, questioning if Kunon was simply bluffing. Determined not to lose his aura in front of Reyes, whom he still wished to befriend, Kunon began generating dozens of bubbles around Surf. Though Surf praised the volume, he dismissed the bubbles as incapable of piercing the barrier. Unrelenting, Kunon multiplied the bubbles, turning them red and swirling them rapidly around the wind shield. If Surf were to drop the barrier, the vortex would sweep him away. Yet the professor still urged Kunon to step up his game. In response, Kunon casually conjured a chair made of water, took a seat, and declared the battle effectively over. He explained that his bubble vortex could be maintained for 2 consecutive days without a time limit, whereas Surf's taxing wind barrier would drain his stamina within half a day at most. Reluctantly acknowledging his strategic defeat, Surf conceded, and Kunon dispelled the vortex. Immediately following the practical test, Kunon returned his focus to Reyes, eagerly asking to see more of her magic and even inviting her out on a parfait date to pique her interest. She firmly rejected him, showing no desire to show off her abilities. Gathering the students in a classroom, Surf reprimanded Kunon for flirting, emphasizing the need to preserve Reyes' peace of mind before her upcoming interview. Seifi then called Hank as the first student to be interviewed. While waiting, Kunon inquired about the interview topics, but Surf explained they varied widely depending on the candidate. Capitalizing on the downtime, Kunon asked Surf several questions about wind magic, which the professor gladly answered. Once all the other students had been called, Surf asked Kunon how he would have handled the practical test if there had been a time limit. Kunon revealed his alternative plan, fusing his water bubbles with Surf's barrier to take control of the wind from the inside. Surf was skeptical, having never heard of such a technique. Kunon admitted he had never tested it, but his gut instinct suggested that hijacking a spell internally would naturally be easier than breaking it from the outside. He theorized that water magic was the most versatile due to its capacity to penetrate most materials, though he acknowledged he could not yet claim it was the strongest until he figured out the exact mechanics. Finally, Seifi arrived to escort Kunon to his interview. Upon reaching the door, Kunon was puzzled. His magical senses were entirely blocked, preventing him from perceiving the room's interior. He asked Seifi for a visual description. Momentarily forgetting his blindness, she realized his predicament and described the room as looking like nighttime, offering to guide him inside. Assuring her he would be fine on his own, Kunon entered the room. For the first time in a while, Kunon experienced true blindness, as even his magic eye was forcibly dispelled. He found himself surrounded by 7 figures. One figure began to approach, revealing herself as Zeon's former master. Kunon immediately cut her off, asking her to keep her distance because he had a fiancée and did not want to get too close to other women. The figure was perplexed, noting reports of his recent flirtations with Reyes. Kunon clarified that his interest in Reyes was purely academic, driven solely by a desire to learn about her magic. Shifting the topic, the figure asked what he had learned that day. Kunon enthusiastically recounted the amazing spells his course mates had demonstrated, expressing his intent to incorporate those techniques into his own arsenal upon returning home. Satisfied with his response, the figure announced his placement in the advanced class, much to Kunon's delight. She then offered to potentially take him on as a personal student if he performed well. However, Kunon had already walked out of the room before she could finish speaking, entirely uninterested in paying attention. Although slightly stung by the dismissal, the figure had to admit that Kunon was truly special. She had noticed him attempt to use an incomplete, unprecedented spell the moment he entered the room, leaving her incredibly excited to see what else he could invent.